So that was the reason why he was waiting for an opportunity to take revenge on Antonio. This was a venture, sir, that Jacob sought for, a thing not in his power to bring to pass. So in this particular conversation, you can get to know that Antonio is borrowing money on behalf of Bassanio, 3,000 ducats from Shylock, abusing Shylock being a Jew, not a Christian, and also being, and he used to call him as a dog. So he used to abuse him with all sort of things. Hi, hello everyone. Myself, B. Shabarani, faculty in English, Vidhyaashram First Grade College, the Temple of Excellence in MYSURU. I once again heartily welcome you all to my session 7 for 3rd Sem BCom English students, the play The Merchant of Venice by William Shakespeare. Hope you remember in the previous session, I explained about Act 1, Scene 2. That is, let us have a recap as to what did I explain in my previous session about this very important and interesting play, The Merchant of Venice by William Shakespeare. I explained about Act 1 and Scene 2, that is in Belmont, a room in Portia's house. As well, I explained about the summary, whole summary of Act 1 and Scene 2. So in this session 7, I am going to explain about Act 1, Scene 3, that is a public place in Venice, and the summary of this particular Act 1 and Scene 3. Let me move on to explain about Act 1 and Scene 3 of this particular play, The Merchant of Venice by William Shakespeare, to 3rd Sem BCom English students, as well explain the summary of this particular Act 1 and Scene 3. Act 1, Scene 3, which takes place in a public place in Venice. Enter Bassanio and Shylock. There's a conversation happening between Bassanio and Shylock. Hope you remember in my previous session when Bassanio met Antonio. At that point of time, Bassanio says that he wanted 3,000 ducats money to clear all the debts that he has made, as well the debts of Antonio, so that he can go and try his luck to marry Portia's hand in marriage. That is, to marry Portia. And now, as at that point of time, Antonio did not have money, as he had invested all his money on his ships. And he said, fine, you go to Venice and ask for any money lender to lend you 3,000 ducats, and Antonio is going to become a guarantor. So now Bassanio meets Shylock, a Shylock who is also a very famous money lender and a merchant in Venice. So now a public place where enter Bassanio and Shylock. Now there is a conversation happening between Bassanio and Shylock. Shylock, 3,000 ducats. So now Bassanio tells that he wanted 3,000 ducats. Bassanio, yes sir, for 3 months. So he says, I am going to repay it back after 3 months. Shylock, for 3 months, well. Bassanio, for the which, as I told you, Antonio shall be bound. Means Antonio is going to become the guarantor. Shylock, Antonio shall become bound, well. Bassanio, may you stead me, will you pleasure me, shall I know your answer? Shylock, 3,000 ducats for 3 months and Antonio bound. Bassanio, your answer to that? Shylock, Antonio is a good man. Bassanio, have you heard any imputation to the contrary? Then Shylock, you can see the picture of Shylock here. Oh no, my meaning in saying he is a good man is to have you understand me that he is sufficient. Yet his means are in supposition. He hath an agrossy bound to Tripolis, another to the Indies. I understand, that is the ship. I understand moreover upon the Rialto, he hath a third at Mexico, a fourth for England, and other ventures he hath. Squandered abroad, but ships are but boats, sailors but men, there be land rats and water thieves and land thieves, mean pirates. And then there is the peril of waters, winds and rocks. The man is notwithstanding sufficient. 3,000 ducats, I think I may take his bond. So this is what he says to Bassanio. Then Bassanio, be assured you may. Then Shylock says, I will be assured I may, and that I may be assured. I will bethink me, may I speak with Antonio. Then Bassanio, if it please you do dine with us. Shylock, yes, to smell pork, to eat of the habitation, which your prophet, the Nazarite, conjured the devil into. I will buy with you, sell with you, talk with you, walk with you, and so following. But I will not eat with you, drink with you, nor pray with you. What news on the Rialto? Who is he comes here? Then Bassanio, this is Ignare Antonio. Shylock, aside, how like a fawning publican he looks. I hate him for he's a Christian. For more for that in low simplicity, he lends out money gratis and brings down the rate of usance here with us in Venice. If I catch him once upon the hip, I will feed fat the ancient grudge I bear him. He hates our sacred nation and he rails even there where merchants most do congregate. On me my bargains and my well-won thrift, which he calls interest, cursed be by tribe if I forgive him. Bassanio, Shylock, do you hear? Shylock, I am debating of my present store, and by the near guess of my memory, I cannot instantly raise up the gross of full 3,000 ducats. What of that? Tubal, a wealthy Hebrew of my tribe, will furnish me. But soft, how many months do you desire? To Antonio, rest you fair, good Signar, your worship was the last man in our mouths. Then Antonio, Shylock, although I neither lend nor borrow, by taking nor by giving of excess, yet to supply the ripe wants of my friend, I'll break a custom. Is he yet possessed? How much he would? Shylock, 3,000 ducats. Antonio, and for 3 months. Shylock, I had forgot 3 months, you told me so. Well then, you're born and let me see, but hear you. Me thought you said you neither lend nor borrow upon advantage. Then Antonio, I do never use it. Then Shylock says, when Jacob grazed his uncle Laban's sheep, this Jacob from our holy Abram was, as his wise mother wrought in his behalf, the third possessor, he was the third, Antonio. And what of him? Did he take interest? So as we all know that Antonio was lending money. Both Antonio and Shylock are the rich merchants in Venice, but Shylock was lending money to people on high interest rate, and he was a Jew, whereas Antonio was also a money lender in Venice, but was lending money with no interest. And he was also clearing the debts of many of people who had taken a loan amount from Shylock. And Antonio was a Christian. So that was the reason why Shylock was hating Antonio, because he was not only a Christian, yet he was spoiling his business by lending money on a very low interest. And he used to clear the debts of the customers who have taken loan from him, so much so that he used to lose the loan interest. So that was the reason why he was waiting for an opportunity to take revenge on Antonio. And that time came when Bassanio approached Shylock to lend him 3,000 ducats, where Antonio will be the guarantor for the loan amount. So Antonio, I do never use it. Shylock, when Jacob grazed his uncle Laban's sheep, this Jacob from our holy Abraham was, as his wise mother wrought in his belief, the third processor, he was the third. Antonio, and what of him did he take interest? Shylock says, no, not take interest, not as you would say, directly interest. Mark what Jacob did. When Laban and himself were compromised, that all the earnings which were streaked and pied should fall as Jacob's hire, the eaves being rang, in the end of autumn turned to the rams, and when the work of generation was between these woolly breeders in the act, the skillful shepherd peeled me certain wands, and in the doing of the deed of kind, he stuck them before the fulsome eaves, who then conceiving did in earning time fall party colored lamps, and those were Jacob's. This was a way to thrive, and he was blessed. And thrift is blessing if men steal it not. Then Antonio, this was a venture, sir, that Jacob sought for, a thing not in his power to bring to pass, but swayed and fashioned by the hand of heaven. Was this inserted to make interest good, or is your gold and silver eaves and rams? Then Shylock says, I cannot tell. I make it breed as fast, but not me signar. Then Antonio says, mark you this, Bassanio, the devil can cite scripture for his purpose. An evil soul producing holy witness, is like a villain with a smiling cheek, a goodly apple rotten at the heart. Oh, what a goodly outside falsehood hath. Shylock, 3,000 ducats. This is a good round sum. 3 months from 12, then let me see the rate. Well, Shylock, shall we be beholding to you? Then Antonio says, well, Shylock, shall we be beholding to you? Then Shylock says, Signor Antonio, many a time and oft in the Rialto you have rated me about my monies and my usances. Still, I have borne it with a patient shrug, for sufferance is the badge of all our tribe. You call me misbeliever, cutthroat, dog, and spit upon my Jewish gabardine, and all for use of that which is mine own. Well then, it now appears you need my help. Go to, then you come to me and you say, Shylock, we would have money. You say so. You that did void your hume upon my beard, and foot me as you spurn a stranger cur. Over your threshold, money is your suit. What should I say to you? Should I not say, hath a dog money? Is it possible? A cur can lend 3,000 ducats. Or shall I bend low and in a bondman's key, with bated breath and whispering humbleness, say this, fair sir, you spit on me on Wednesday last. You spawned me such a day another time. You called me a dog, and for these courtesies I lend you thus much monies. Then Antonio says, I am as like to call thee so again, to spit on thee again, to spurn thee too. If thou wilt lend this money, lend it not. As to thy friends, for when did friendship take a breed for barren metal of his friend? But lend it rather to thine enemy, who if he break, thou mayst with better face exact the penalty. Then Shylock says, why look you how you storm? I would be friends with you and have your love. Forget the shames that you have stained me with. Supply your present wants and take no doit of usance for my monies, and you will not hear me. This is kind I offer. Then Bassanio, this were kindness. Then Shylock says, this kindness will I show. Go with me to a notary, seal me there, your single bond, and in a merry sport, if you repay me not on such a day, in such a place, such sum or sums as are expressed in the condition, let the forfeit be nominated for an equal pound of your fair flesh to be cut off and taken, in what part of your body pleaseth me. Antonio, content, I'll faith, I'll seal to such a bond, and say there is much kindness in the Jew. Bassanio, you shall not seal to such a bond for me, I'll rather dwell in my necessity. Then Antonio says, why fear not, man? I will not forfeit. Within these 2 months, that's a month before this bond expires, I do expect return of thrice 3 times the value of this bond. So, in this particular conversation, you can get to know that Antonio is borrowing money on behalf of Bassanio, 3,000 ducats from Shylock. And Shylock is, after having a lot of conversation, Shylock agrees for it but makes a bond. What is that written in the bond? That if at all Antonio fails to repay back the loan amount of 3,000 ducats within 3 months, then he need to give a pound of flesh from any part of the body which he pleases to have from. So that was the bond. Then Bassanio says, no, 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 you're not going to sign that bond. But as I said, Bassanio was a close friend of Antonio, and Antonio wanted to help Bassanio to marry Portia. So that was the reason why he was ready to be a guarantor for the borrowed money of 3,000 ducats for Bassanio. Shylock, oh Father Abraham, what these Christians are, whose own hard dealings teaches them suspect the thoughts of others, pray you tell me this. If he should break his day, what should I gain? By the exaction of the forfeiture, a pound of man's flesh taken from a man is not so estimable, profitable neither, as flesh of muttons, beefs, or goats. I say to buy his favor, I extend this friendship. If he will take it so, if not, adieu. And for my love, I pray you wrong me not. Then Antonio says, yes, Shylock, I will seal unto this bond. Shylock is not ready to take the high interest for the 3,000 ducats amount which Antonio is ready to pay for it, because Antonio was very much confident about his goods returning with a good profit. So that was the reason why he was ready to sign the bond made by Shylock, where he has to give a pound of flesh from his body if he fails to repay back the loan amount within 3 months. So he is ready to sign the bond. Then Shylock, then meet me forthwith at the notary's, give him direction for this merry bond, and I will go and purse the ducats straight. So he says, you go to the notary and sign the bond, and I am going to give you the 3,000 ducats to Bassanio. See to my house, left in the fearful guard of an unthrifty knave, and presently I will be with you. Antonio, I thee, gentle Jew. Exit Shylock. The Hebrew will turn Christian, he grows kind. Bassanio, I like not fair terms and a villain's mind. Antonio, come on, in this there can be no dismay. My ships come home a month before the day. Exeunt means exit. That was the conversation that happened between Bassanio, Antonio, and Shylock in Act 1, Scene 3. Now, let me explain about the summary of this whole act, that is Act 1, Scene 3. So, back in Venice, Bassanio is trying to convince Shylock, a Jewish money lender, to lend him 3,000 ducats for 3 months, with Antonio bound to repay the debt. So, when Bassanio approaches Shylock and asks him to lend a 3,000 ducats amount which he needed, and Antonio being a guarantor. Frustrated by Shylock's stalling, Bassanio demands an answer. Shylock concedes that Antonio is a good man. That is, Shylock believes Antonio will be good for the money that Bassanio wants to borrow. Therefore, after little more baffling, he accepts the terms that Bassanio has proposed. So, Shylock was hating Antonio so much so that Antonio used to abuse him, call him a dog, he used to spit him, and he used to lend money on a very low interest, and so he used to repay back the loan amounts of the people who have taken loan from Shylock. So all this made Shylock very much angry on Antonio, and he was waiting for an opportunity to take revenge on Antonio. And that time came when Bassanio approached Shylock for a loan amount of 3,000 ducats, and Antonio being a guarantor. So this made Shylock to think of a very important bond, so much so that what was written in the bond and Antonio signed for that bond is, if at all he is not able to repay back the loan amount of 3,000 ducats within 3 months' time, then he has to give a pound of flesh from his body. That means to say he wanted to kill him and get rid of him forever. So Shylock then asks whether he can speak with Antonio himself. Bassanio invites Shylock to dine with them both that night, but Shylock declines. So Shylock then asks whether he can speak with Antonio himself. Bassanio invites Shylock to dine with him for dinner both that night, but Shylock declines. Although he will do business with Christians, he explains he would go against his religious principles. He would to eat or drink or pray with them. So he says, no, I'm not going to come for the dinner. By coincidence, at this moment, Antonio appears. Although Shylock notices Antonio at first he ignores him, remarking privately that he harbors an ancient grudge towards the Christians. So at that point of time, coincidentally, at this moment, Antonio appears. Although Shylock notices Antonio coming, but he remarks privately that he harbors an ancient grudge on him because he is a Christian. Shylock explains to the audience that he hates Antonio because he lends out money gratis or free of interest, thereby bringing down interest rates for professional money lenders such as himself. The very reason for Shylock to hate Antonio was what? Antonio was lending money on a very less interest, and that was affecting his business and that was the reason why even Shylock was hating Antonio, who are almost all Jews. More importantly, Antonio has repeatedly insulted the Jewish people in general and Shylock in particular. Shylock is determined to get revenge on Antonio, not only for himself but also for his tribe. Tribe means for the Jew, because Shylock was a Jew and Antonio was a Christian. So Antonio was abusing Shylock being a Jew, not a Christian, and he used to call him as a dog. So he used to abuse him with all sort of things, and that made him get angry on Antonio, and he wanted to take revenge on Antonio. Antonio approaches Shylock saying that he ordinarily would not take part in a transaction involving interest, but that this one time he will break his personal principle in order to help his friend. So he says, usually I don't agree for a loan amount, and that too on interest, but this time I am ready to take the loan amount from you on interest because I want to help my friend, that is Bassanio. Shylock agrees to lend Bassanio the money. Shylock then defends his practice of charging interest by citing the biblical story of Jacob, When Jacob was working as a shepherd for his uncle Laban, Shylock reminds Antonio he found a clever way to earn interest for his efforts. He cut a deal with Laban in which he got to keep any sheep that were born with a streaked color. Then he employed a magic trick to get all the sheep to breed streaked lambs, which he was by contract entitled to keep for himself. Shylock defends this kind of behavior similar to his own as representing thrift rather than theft. So he gives an example of what? That Shylock then defends his practice of charging interest by citing the biblical story of Jacob. When Jacob was working as a shepherd for his uncle Laban, Shylock reminds Antonio he found a clever way to earn interest for his efforts. He cut a deal with Laban in which he got to keep any sheep that were born with a streaked color. Then he employed a magic trick to get all the sheep to breed streaked lambs, which he was, by contract, entitled to keep for himself. Shylock defends this kind of behavior similar to his own as representing thrift rather than theft. Outraged that Shylock would cite the Bible in order to defend what Venetian Christians consider to be the sin of usury, Antonio insults Shylock, because when Shylock gives an example of citing the Bible in about Jacob, and Antonio insults Shylock. Shylock in turn cites Antonio's previous mistreatment of him. Antonio has publicly abused him many times and even spat upon him his clothing. Why, Shylock asks, should he lend to Antonio as freely as he would do to a relative? So he says, why should I, when you have abused me, when you have, you spat at me, so why should I lend money to you at this time? Enraged, Antonio begins to insult Shylock again. There is no need to pretend to be friends. He says, lend money to him as to an enemy. So he says, there is no need for you to be a friend of mine. You just lend money to me, just like how you lend money to a. Teasing Antonio for getting so worked up, Shylock then goes on to propose an unusual compromise. He says that this time he will not charge interest on his loan. So Shylock was waiting for an opportunity to take revenge on Antonio. So now he says, okay, I'll lend you money, but not on interest. So he had another plan in his mind. He wanted to get rid of Antonio forever. So he made a bond in which it was mentioned that if Antonio failed to repay the loan amount of 3,000 ducats, then he is supposed to take a pound of flesh from his body. That means he wants to kill him. However, if Antonio defaults on the loan and is unable to pay, Shylock will be entitled to cut 1 pound of Antonio's flesh from any part of Antonio's body that Shylock chooses. Antonio agrees despite Bassanio's nervousness about binding his friend to such a potentially dangerous contract. Bassanio does not like his friend Antonio signing this bond because it was a very dangerous contract, because if at all if he fails to repay the loan amount, then he has to give a pound of flesh from his body, from any part of his body. That means he will be killed by Shylock. So, talking to himself, Shylock gleefully hints at the fact that he has achieved the first step in his still mysterious plan for revenge. But Antonio remains unconcerned. He is sure his ships will return. So, in spite of it, Antonio was very confident and he signs the bond because he was very much sure that his ships are going to return with good profit and that he will be able to repay back the loan amount that he has taken from Shylock, that is 3,000 ducats on behalf of Bassanio, with 3 times 3,000 ducats at least 1 month before Shylock's deadline. So Shylock has given a deadline of 3 months. Maybe I'm going to pay back 3 times the 3,000 ducats within 1 month. Hope you all have understood about this wonderful Act 1, Scene 3. The conversation that happens between Bassanio, Shylock and Antonio. So this is a very important scene from examination point of view, that is Act 1, Scene 3, because it is in this scene we get to know that Shylock is ready to give a loan amount of 3,000 ducats to Bassanio based on a condition. So in the coming session, I'll be explaining about Act 2, Scene 1, that is in Belmont, a room in Portia's house, flourish of cornets, and the summary. Hope you all have understood this Act 1, Scene 3 of very important play, The Merchant of Venice, written by William Shakespeare for 3rd Sem BCom English students. Thank you.